And joining us tonight to talk about everything that happened this week in the courtroom is Charles Coleman. He is an attorney based in New York. He's also a former prosecutor in Brooklyn. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good evening.
Good evening. So what stood out to you during this first week?
Well, this week was an interesting one in that we saw a transition from the prosecution in terms of where they went with their witnesses, starting with the very emotional witnesses that were going to set the color and the flavor of what this trial was about for the jury and really grab them in from a feelings and emotional place. And then toward the end of the week, and I suspect what we will see continue in the beginning of next week, is we've seen a transition into the more technical aspects of the trial. Now, there are a couple of things that it's important that viewers understand in terms of what happened this week. Of course, we started with a different set of witnesses, the firefighter, the MMA fighter, the 9-year-old girl, and the gentleman, the 61-year-old gentleman who was an eyewitness. And they all talked about what it was that they saw and they observed when they were on the scene that day in Minneapolis. But then after that, what we saw was they called George Floyd's former girlfriend. And then in that moment, she had an opportunity to humanize their struggles with opioid addiction in a way that really took out the sting from what the defense has planned to argue has contributed to George Floyd's death. So at that point, when they added that witness, they began to make the transition into the more technical aspects of the trial, which quite frankly may not be to the average person the most exciting, the most interesting, the most heart-wrenching, but these are essential elements that the prosecution has to get out in order to establish what they need to prove all of the elements of their charges and of the crime. So that's what we will likely see going into next week. I think it was interesting to watch the diversity in the witnesses, both ethnically, gender-wise, generationally, because it really put a huge cross-section of America on display for the jury. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out in front of the jury once it's time to render a verdict.
You mentioned his girlfriend. She testified about how both of them became addicted to opioids. Were prosecutors right in their strategy to address his drug use directly and the roles that drugs did or didn't play in his death, which are going to be a huge key for the defense in this trial, right?
Absolutely. I think that, it takes away a lot of what the defense has to work with. This was what a prosecutor is supposed to do in this instance. It helps them control the narrative. They get in front of it. They get an opportunity to control the narrative in front of the jury where they make it very human, where you talk about the struggles of opioid addiction, something that tens of thousands of Americans and their families are impacted by annually. And so now this is something that instead of it being George Floyd's drug or substance abuse issues on trial, now it's been humanized and the sting has been taken out. So when the defense begins to talk about it, there's no shock, there's no surprise, and the wow factor is significantly lessened. So this was absolutely the right move strategically for the prosecution to do because it allows them to keep control of the narrative.
And prosecutors are bringing in witnesses to vouch for George Floyd's character, but George Floyd isn't the one on trial here. It would make sense if the defense brought in people to talk about his character, but why are the prosecutors going in this direction?
That's a great question. There are generally two reasons that I think the prosecution is looking to do that. Number one, of course, in terms of what the defense is looking to do, it does continue to humanize him in terms of someone who did not deserve this happening. What is the practical effect of that? The practical effect is they are going to want the judge to go beyond the sentencing guidelines or recommendations and give the absolute maximum that they can. They're going to want to provide the judge with extenuating evidence that is going to create a circumstance that would allow the judge or give the judge reason to consider going beyond the sentencing guidelines if, in fact, Derek Chauvin is convicted. So those two things are very important to remember. The other thing that I think strategically they're trying to do is they are trying to dispel any sort of myth around George Floyd being resistant, George Floyd being some sort of rogue criminal, because what we will see during the defense's case in chief is that they're going to do everything that they can to discredit George Floyd and his image. So in terms of, again, controlling the narrative as you have an opportunity to, because you go first as the prosecution, that is exactly what they're doing. They're being strategic and they're being intentional about how they paint this picture of who this man was before he was killed on that fateful day.
And we've been talking mostly about the prosecution because so far this is their case in this first week. But the defense is pointing to the crowd of people who gathered around the scene. Is that going to be an effective defense that the officers felt threatened by the crowd?
It's a very interesting argument because now we've already heard from an EMT who talked about the fact that they were there. We've heard from other police officers who talked about the fact that they were on the scene, at least in terms of securing the scene, and that they did not feel fear. So I don't know how much that argument is going to hold. I think that it is going to be a very difficult line for them to create, the defense that is, in terms of establishing what that fear was, that fear was legitimate, and how that fear may have influenced Derek Chauvin's actions on that day. I don't necessarily know that that argument is a clear one. I know that they tried to make it. When I heard it for the first time, I felt like they were almost grasping for straws, but it will be interesting to see how they sort of connect those dots and bring that together, because it's one that I think if somehow they are able to make clear and get the jury to believe that somehow the anger and the vitriol that they allege came from this crowd influenced Derek Chauvin's actions, then perhaps now you have a question in terms of reasonable doubt around the requisite mindset necessary in order to get a conviction.
Charles Coleman, thank you very much for joining us. It's fascinating to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a great one.